You've probably heard this before, right? That to really learn a skill, you need to make your practice sessions harder, messier, more random. It's a super popular idea in coaching and learning science. But a massive new study is putting that whole theory under the microscope. So, yeah, let's dive into this. What if all that struggle you're told to embrace during practice isn't actually giving you better results in the long run? Especially when it comes to something as complex as sports. Today, we're going to look at the evidence and see if this famous learning hack is the real deal or if it's just a myth.
All right, so first things first, we've got to understand the theory itself. Now, in the academic world, it's called the contextual interference effect. But honestly, a much better name for it is the smart practice paradox. And the whole key to this thing is right there in the name. It's a paradox. The idea behind contextual interference, or CI for short, is that when you make your practice sessions more difficult and random, it actually helps you remember the skill way better down the line, even if it feels like you're failing a lot more in the moment. So what does this actually look like? Well, imagine you're learning a song on the piano. Blocked practice, that's low interference, is like playing the first verse over and over and over until it's perfect, then moving on to the chorus. But random practice, high interference, would be mixing it all up. You'd play a little of the verse, then jump to the bridge, then a piece of the chorus, back to the verse, all in a totally unpredictable order. Messy, right?
And this is where the two-step paradox really kicks in. So the theory goes that during that initial learning phase, what they call acquisition, your performance is actually supposed to be worse with that random, messy practice. You're going to make more mistakes. But, and this is the big but, when you come back a week later for the retention test, you should perform way better than the person who just did the simple blocked practice. That short-term struggle is supposed to bake the skill into your brain for good.
It's a really cool theory, and it has absolutely shaped how coaches and teachers think for decades. But here's the million-dollar question. Does it actually hold up when you put it under serious scientific pressure, especially for complicated sports skills?
You know, the original research for this stuff was on really simple things, like memorizing word lists or learning basic finger tapping patterns. Trying to apply that to learning a complex volleyball serve or a golf swing, that's a pretty huge leap of faith. So, a team of researchers decided it was time to find out for sure. And they didn't just go out and do one more small study. Nope. They did what's called a meta-analysis, which is basically the Supreme Court of scientific evidence. It's a study of studies. It takes all the existing research out there on a topic, mushes all the data together, and tries to find the real overall truth. It's the highest level of evidence we have. And this was no small review either. This 2024 meta-analysis, published in the Educational Psychology Review, pulled together the data from 36 separate experiments. We're talking over 1,100 people, all learning different gross motor skills. You know, things like tennis strokes, baseball swings, basketball shots, the whole shebang. So, they took all the data from all those studies, crunched the numbers, and looked for one thing. Does the smart practice paradox actually exist in the real world of sports? And the results, well, they were not what most people expected.
20%. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the big headline here. Now, let's break down what that actually means. Across all those studies and all the different skills they measured, that classic paradox we talked about, where random practice hurts you now but helps you later, it only showed up in about 1/5 of the cases. That's it. For the other 80% of the time, the theory just didn't pan out. This first finding pretty much blows up the first half of the paradox. Remember, random practice is supposed to make you perform worse while you're learning. But when they pulled all the data, guess what? There was no significant difference. People got better at pretty much the exact same rate. Didn't matter if their practice was blocked or random. So that whole idea of a necessary struggle in the beginning, the data just doesn't back it up. It turns out that messy practice wasn't really holding people back during that initial learning phase after all. Okay, so you might be thinking, but what about the long-term benefit? That's the important part. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. The random practice group did show a tiny advantage in memory. They forgot just a little bit less over time, but the key word there is tiny. And here is the bottom line, the crucial takeaway from all this. When you look at the total long-term gain from the very beginning of training to the final test, there was no real statistical difference between the two groups. That very small memory boost from random practice just wasn't big enough to make a meaningful difference in the real world.
The study's authors didn't mince words. They put it pretty bluntly in their conclusion. That popular idea that you can just take this theory and apply it to all sports skills, it's just not supported by the best evidence we have today.
So, wow, if this belief that so many of us have held is actually on shaky ground, what does that mean for how we should be coaching or how we should be learning complex physical skills? Well, why wouldn't it work? Why would a theory that seems to make sense in a simple lab task fall apart in the dynamic world of sports? The researchers had a few really good ideas.
First off, a complex skill like a tennis serve is already incredibly difficult for your brain. That's what they call intra-task interference. So if you start piling on more interference by randomly switching to other skills, you might just cause cognitive overload. You're not strengthening your brain. You're just frying your working memory. And honestly, it might just be the wrong tool for the job. This theory came from simple, fine motor tasks, which are a world away from the complex, whole-body movements you need in sports.
So the big takeaway here is this. It's not that random practice is bad, but the idea that it's some kind of universal secret weapon for better long-term learning in sports, well, the evidence just isn't there. This huge analysis suggests it doesn't really give you any significant advantage over just practicing in a more straightforward, blocked way.
And this all leads to a really fascinating final thought. Science moves forward by challenging the things we think we know for sure. So if one of our most popular go-to models for learning is maybe not what we thought it was, it just blows the door wide open for new ideas and forces us to ask what other, maybe even better, methods for mastering skills are just waiting out there for us to discover.